The Great Hall of the Galactic Regulatory Commission stretched for nearly a mile in every direction, and Commander Viral Thax stood at its center like a statue made of living crystal, his body pulsing with soft blue light that indicated his satisfaction with the proceedings unfolding before him. Representatives from over 200 species filled the curved seats that rose in endless tiers toward the domed ceiling, and every single one of them had gathered to witness the announcement of Mandate 7742, a new law that would reshape how species conducted themselves during off-world expeditions. "Fellow beings of the Coalition," Viral Thax began, his voice carrying through the chamber, without need for amplification, because his crystalline form naturally resonated at frequencies all species could hear. "We have gathered here today to address a matter of grave importance to the safety and dignity of our united peoples." The chamber fell silent, and even the Queloth delegates stopped their constant chittering to listen with their compound eyes fixed on the glowing commander. It has come to the attention of this commission that a particular piece of equipment commonly used by certain species has caused no fewer than 17 diplomatic incidents in the past standard year alone. Viral Thax continued, and his light pulsed a deep amber to show the seriousness of his words. A holographic display flickered to life behind him, showing images that made several representatives gasp or click or hum in their various expressions of shock. The first image showed a Felixian trader who had been found unconscious inside what appeared to be a fabric tube. His feline features pale, and his fur matted from the lack of oxygen that the strange device had caused when he sealed it too tightly around himself. The second image was even more disturbing, showing a young Queloth larva who had mistaken the fabric tube for a proper cocoon and had begun its metamorphosis cycle 3 years too early, nearly dying in the process because the material did not provide the nutrients a real cocoon would have given. The third image caused the most reaction of all, and several Morvan representatives actually rose from their seats in outrage when they saw their former ambassador wrapped in the fabric device and being loaded onto a cargo shuttle by workers who had assumed she was simply a rolled carpet. These incidents, Viral Thax declared with his light now burning a fierce red, were all caused by the same piece of equipment, a device that the humans call a sleeping bag. Every eye and sensor and optical receptor in the chamber turned to look at the small cluster of human representatives seated in the middle tier, and Dr. Amara Chun felt the weight of 200 species staring at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to accusation. She was a tall woman with dark skin and gray-streaked hair that she kept pulled back in a practical bun, and she had spent 30 years working in xenobiology before being appointed as the human liaison to the commission. But nothing in her long career had prepared her for the feeling of being blamed for diplomatic disasters caused by a camping accessory. "Commander," she said, rising from her seat with careful dignity, "if I may speak?" Viral Thax's light shifted to a neutral white, which meant he would allow her words. "The sleeping bag is a human invention dating back thousands of years on our homeworld," Dr. Chun explained, keeping her voice calm and educational, "and it was designed for human physiology specifically, never intended for use by other species who might not understand its proper operation." "And yet," Viral Thax interrupted, his tone carrying a note of accusation, "humans have distributed these devices across coalition space without any regard for how other species might interact with them." Durchem wanted to point out that humans had never forced anyone to use sleeping bags, and that the incidents in question had all involved individuals who had acquired the devices on their own and used them incorrectly. But she knew that arguing with the Commission rarely produced positive results. "The Commission has therefore decided," Viral Thax announced, returning his attention to the full assembly, "that effective immediately, all insulated personal enclosures of the type known as sleeping bags are hereby banned from use on any coalition expedition, mission, or sanctioned journey." A murmur swept through the chamber, and Dr. Chun felt her heart sink because she knew exactly what this meant. This includes, the commander continued, the upcoming Kepler 447 expedition, which will depart in 3 standard weeks. Dr. Chun raised her hand again, and when Viral Thax acknowledged her with a flicker of his light, she spoke with barely contained concern in her voice. Commander, Kepler 447b has nighttime temperatures that drop to -60 degrees, she said. And she saw several representatives shudder at the number because most species considered anything below freezing to be unbearably cold. And the human members of that expedition will require adequate protection from the elements. Standard thermal blankets will be provided, Viral Thax replied with what seemed like dismissive confidence, as they are for all coalition expeditions. And these blankets have been approved for use by all species without the dangers posed by sleeping bags. Di-Chun opened her mouth to protest further, to explain that standard thermal blankets were designed for species with much slower metabolisms than humans, to point out that her people would likely suffer hypothermia within hours of nightfall. But she saw the set of Viral Thax's crystalline features and knew that his decision was final. Very well, Commander, she said instead, and she sat back down with a sense of quiet determination building in her chest. The other human representatives looked at her with worry in their eyes, but Dr. Chen simply smiled and shook her head slightly to tell them not to speak. As the assembly continued with other matters of galactic importance, Dr. Chen pulled out her personal data tablet and began taking notes, her fingers moving quickly across the screen as ideas formed in her mind. She thought about the Kepler ferns that the advanced survey team had documented on the planet, the ones with the broad, waxy leaves that somehow kept the plants alive through the brutal nights. She thought about the cargo manifest for the expedition and what materials might be repurposed if necessary. She thought about the fact that the Commission had banned sleeping bags specifically, using very precise language that described insulated personal enclosures with synthetic filling and mechanical closures. And she smiled, because humans have been finding ways around rules and restrictions since the very first cave dweller decided that the tribal elder was wrong about which berries were safe to eat. When the assembly finally ended and the representatives began filing out of the great chamber, Dr. Chun walked with her head held high and her mind already racing ahead to the challenges that awaited on Kepler 447b. The other species watched her go, and some of them whispered to each other about how the humans seemed strangely unbothered by the new mandate. They would learn, as so many had learned before them, that telling humans they could not do something was often the fastest way to make them do something even more impressive instead. The transport ship touched down on Kepler 447b with a gentle thud that sent small clouds of frost spiraling up from the frozen ground. And Dr. Amara Chun was the first human to step out onto the planet's surface. The cold hit her immediately like a physical force, wrapping around her environmental suit and trying to find any gap or weakness in its protection. And she understood in that moment just how serious their situation truly was. Behind her came the rest of the expedition team, 54 beings in total, representing 8 different species, and each one reacted to the temperature in their own unique way. The Queloth clicked happily as they scuttled down the ramp on their many legs, their chitinous bodies naturally insulated, and their compound eyes gleaming with excitement at the new world before them. The Felixians emerged more cautiously, their thick fur puffing up automatically to trap warmth. But their feline faces showed approval at the crisp air that reminded them of the mountain regions on their homeworld. The Morven delegates floated down with their robes billowing in the slight breeze, their bodies generating enough internal heat that they barely noticed the chill at all. And the humans pulled their suits tighter and tried not to shiver too visibly. Overseer Crixtel, the expedition leader, was a Queloth of impressive size and authority. her carapace marked with the intricate patterns that showed her high rank and her mandibles, constantly moving as she processed the scents and sounds of this alien world. "We will establish base camp here," she announced. Her voice translated through the devices that every team member wore. "I expect full cooperation from all species as we work together to survey this planet for the Coalition." The first day passed quickly as everyone focused on setting up the prefabricated structures that would serve as their living quarters and research stations. And the work kept the humans warm enough that they almost forgot about the coming night. Almost, but not quite. Private Jonas Reeve was a young soldier assigned to provide security for the expedition, and he had grown up in the warm southern regions of Earth, where temperatures rarely dropped below freezing. So nothing in his experience had prepared him for what happened when the sun began to set on Kepler 447b. The temperature, which had been merely uncomfortable during the day, plummeted like a stone dropped from a cliff, and within an hour of sunset, it had fallen past -40 degrees and was still dropping. "Everyone inside," Overseer Crystal ordered, and the team members hurried into the main habitat structure, where heating units had been set up to maintain a livable temperature. The problem became clear almost immediately. The heating units were designed to maintain a temperature comfortable for the majority of Coalition species, which meant they kept the interior at just above freezing, a temperature that the Queloth found pleasantly warm and that the Phylexians could easily tolerate with their fur. For the humans, it was like trying to sleep inside a refrigerator. Dr. Chun distributed the standard-issue thermal blankets that the Commission had provided, and she watched with growing concern as her fellow humans wrapped themselves in the thin silvery material and tried to find comfortable positions on their sleeping platforms. The blankets reflected heat back toward the body, but they did not generate any warmth of their own. And for species like humans, who constantly lost heat through their skin and their breath, the blankets simply could not keep up with the loss. By midnight, Jonas Reeve was shivering uncontrollably, his teeth chattering so loudly that the Queloth in the next section could hear it through the walls. Dairyuki Tanaka, the expedition's xenobiologist, had curled into the tightest ball she could manage. But her fingers and toes had gone numb hours ago, and she could feel the cold creeping deeper into her core with every passing minute. The other 10 humans were in similar states, some worse than others, and Dr. Chan moved among them with what little medical equipment they had, checking temperatures and vital signs with growing alarm. "This is not sustainable," she muttered to herself as she noted that Reeve's core temperature had dropped nearly 2 degrees below normal, putting him in the early stages of hypothermia. She found the young soldier an extra blanket and positioned him closer to one of the heating units, but she knew it would not be enough if the nights continued like this. When morning finally came and the temperature rose to merely uncomfortable levels again, the humans emerged from the habitat looking exhausted and pale, their movements slow and clumsy from a night without real sleep. Overseer Crickstell observed them with her compound eyes, and her translator rendered her tone as something between concern and satisfaction. "The humans seem to be struggling," she noted to her Queloth assistant. "Perhaps this will teach them that not every planet is suited for their kind." The assistant clicked in agreement, but neither of them offered any solutions or sympathy. Da-Chun overheard the comment and felt a flash of anger rise in her chest, but she pushed it down and focused instead on the problem at hand. "Team meeting," she announced to the other humans. "Cargo bay, 30 minutes. The alien members of the expedition paid little attention as the 12 humans gathered in the storage area, where their equipment and supplies were kept, assuming that the soft-skinned creatures were simply complaining among themselves about the cold. They had no idea what was about to happen. Inside the cargo bay, Dr. Chun looked at the faces of her fellow humans and saw the same thing in each of their eyes, a stubborn refusal to give up that was as much a part of their species as their need for warmth. "The blankets are not working," she stated simply. "And if we spend another week of nights like that last one, we are going to have serious medical emergencies on our hands." "What about requesting emergency evac?" asked Lieutenant Sarah Park, the team's second in command, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "We could," Dr. Chen admitted, "but that would mean proving every species right about human fragility, confirming every assumption that we cannot survive without our special equipment and our special accommodations." The humans exchanged glances, and not a single one of them wanted that. "So, what do we do?" Jonas Reeve asked, his voice still weak from his brush with hypothermia, but his eyes showing the determination that had made him volunteer for this mission in the first place. Dia Chun smiled, and she pulled up the planetary survey data on her tablet, scrolling to the section about local flora. "We do what humans have always done," she said. "We adapt, we improvise, and we make something new out of whatever we can find." She showed them the images of the Kepler ferns, their broad leaves thick with natural oils that insulated the plants through the deadly nights, and she saw understanding dawn on the faces around her. "They banned sleeping bags," she said, "but they never said anything about thermal cocoons." And with those words, the real work began. The Kepler ferns grew in thick clusters near the base of the rocky outcroppings that dotted the frozen landscape. And Jonas Reeve knelt beside one of them with his collection bag open and his hands working carefully to harvest the broad leaves without damaging the plant itself. "These things are amazing," Dr. Tanaka said as she scanned a leaf with her portable analyzer, her scientific curiosity temporarily overriding her exhaustion from the previous night. "The cellular structure is completely different from anything on Earth, with tiny air pockets throughout the tissue that trap heat like natural insulation." Dia Chun nodded as she gathered her own collection of leaves, her mind already working through the engineering problems they would need to solve. The indigenous species on this planet, the ones that went extinct millions of years ago according to the survey data, they probably used these plants for warmth too, she mused. Nature had already figured out how to survive here long before we arrived. The 12 humans worked through the morning, gathering leaves and carrying them back to the cargo bay where their secret project was taking shape. Lieutenant Park had taken charge of the construction effort, her engineering background proving invaluable as she designed the basic structure of what they were calling the thermal cocoon. "We cannot use the standard sleeping bag design," she explained to the group as they gathered around her makeshift workbench, "because that would violate the Commission's mandate and give Overseer Crick's Thal reason to shut us down." She held up a sketch she had made on her tablet, showing something that looked less like a sleeping bag and more like a wrapped bundle. "Instead, we are going to create something completely different," she continued. "A sealed envelope of fabric that you wrap around yourself and secure with ties rather than zippers, filled with organic insulation rather than synthetic materials." The distinction might have seemed trivial to an outside observer, but in the world of galactic bureaucracy, such technical differences were everything. A sleeping bag, according to the official Commission definition, was an insulated personal enclosure with synthetic filling and mechanical closures. What the humans were building had organic filling and fabric ties, making it technically a different category of equipment entirely. The work took most of the day, with different team members contributing their various skills to the project. Dr. Marcus Webb, the expedition's geologist, had the strongest hands from years of breaking rocks, and he took on the task of crushing the fern leaves into a fluffy mass that would trap air and retain heat. Corporal Diana Reyes, who had grown up on a farm and knew more about fabric and stitching than anyone else on the team, led the effort to construct the outer shells from salvaged cargo netting and torn uniform material. The others helped wherever they could, stuffing leaves into the fabric pouches, testing the ties to make sure they would hold, and occasionally standing watch at the cargo bay door to make sure no curious aliens came to investigate what the humans were doing. By late afternoon, they had completed their first prototype, a lumpy but functional cocoon that Dr. Tanaka volunteered to test. "If this does not work, I'm going to be very cold tonight," she said with a nervous laugh as she crawled inside the strange contraption and allowed her teammates to wrap it around her and tie it closed. The cocoon was not elegant by any means, with leaves poking out through gaps in the stitching, and the whole thing resembling something a large insect might have built. But it was warm. Dr. Tanaka's eyes went wide as she felt the difference immediately. The natural oils in the fern leaves, creating a barrier that held her body heat close, while the crushed plant material provided insulation that the standard blankets could never match. "It works," she whispered, and then louder so everyone could hear. "It actually works." A cheer went up from the assembled humans, though they quickly stifled it to avoid attracting attention from the alien members of the expedition. They spent the remaining hours before sunset building more cocoons, enough for each human to have one, and when night fell and the temperature began its deadly drop, the humans retreated to their section of the habitat with their strange new sleeping devices. The Queloth and Felixians and Morvans, who passed by the human sleeping area, gave curious glances at the lumpy shapes wrapped in fabric and tied with cord. But none of them thought to question what exactly the humans had made. And when morning came, the humans emerged looking rested and healthy for the first time since they had arrived on Kepler 447b. Darchun stretched her arms above her head and felt the satisfying pop of joints that had spent the night in actual comfort rather than shivering misery. And she allowed herself a small smile of triumph. Jonas Reeve was practically bouncing with energy, his hypothermia scare already fading from memory as he joined the other humans for the morning meal. "I slept so well," he said to anyone who would listen. "I mean, really slept, not just that shivering half-consciousness from the nights before." The other humans nodded in agreement, and Dr. Chun noticed that several of the younger Queloth researchers were watching them with what she had learned to recognize as curiosity in their compound eyes. "Dr. Chun," one of them clicked, his translator converting his words into careful English. "You seem to be doing much better today. Have you adapted to the temperature?" "Something like that," Dr. Chun replied with a mysterious smile. "Humans are very good at adapting." The Queloth tilted his head in the gesture his species used to indicate confusion, but he did not press further, and the expedition continued its work for another day. Night after night, the humans slept warm and comfortable in their thermal cocoons, while the aliens assumed they had simply gotten used to the cold. And the expedition began to make real progress on its survey mission. But secrets have a way of coming out, especially in close quarters with dozens of curious scientists. And it was only a matter of time before someone discovered what the humans had really been doing. That discovery came on the 8th night, when Overseer Crickstall decided to conduct an unannounced inspection of the human sleeping quarters. She was not prepared for what she found. Overseer Crickstall stood in the doorway of the human sleeping quarters with her mandibles frozen in what the translator could only describe as complete and total shock. The 12 humans lay in neat rows on their sleeping platforms, but they were not wrapped in the standard issue thermal blankets that the Commission had provided. And they were definitely not shivering and miserable the way they had been during the first nights of the expedition. Instead, each human was encased in what appeared to be a lumpy fabric shell, stuffed with some kind of organic material. Their faces peaceful, and their breathing deep and regular in the way of beings who were actually comfortable. "What is this?" Crickstall demanded, her voice sharp enough to wake the nearest sleepers. Da-Chun opened her eyes slowly, taking a moment to orient herself before sitting up and facing the agitated Queloth Overseer. "Good evening, Overseer," she said calmly. "Or perhaps I should say good morning, given the hour." "Do not try to distract me with pleasantries," Crickstall clicked, her compound eyes scanning the room and cataloging every strange detail. You were forbidden from using sleeping bags. And yet here, I find you in what are clearly some kind of insulated personal enclosures." Dr. Chun smiled the patient smile of someone who had been waiting for this exact confrontation and had prepared her arguments long in advance. "With respect, Overseer, these are not sleeping bags," she said, and she gestured for Lieutenant Park to join her in explaining. Park stood and unwrapped one of the empty cocoons that had been set aside for repairs, holding it open so Crystal could see its construction. A sleeping bag, according to the official commission definition that was included in Mandate 7742, is an insulated personal enclosure with synthetic filling and mechanical closures such as zippers or snaps, Park explained, her voice taking on the precise tone of someone reciting from memory. "What we have created here is something entirely different." She pointed to the crushed fern leaves that filled the interior of the cocoon. "The filling is 100% organic, harvested from local plant life with no synthetic materials whatsoever." Then she demonstrated the ties that held the cocoon closed. "And the closure system is simple fabric ties, not mechanical closures of any kind." Crixdale's mandibles clicked rapidly as she processed this information, her compound eyes darting between the humans and their strange inventions. "You found a loophole," she said finally, her translator conveying a tone of disbelief mixed with something that might have been grudging respect. "We found a solution," Dr. Chun corrected gently. "One that keeps our team members healthy and productive without violating the letter of the Commission's mandate." The Overseer stood in silence for a long moment, and the humans watched her with varying degrees of concern, wondering if she would accept their explanation or if she would find some way to shut them down anyway. Finally, Crixdale made a sound that the translator interpreted as a sigh of resignation. "I will need to consult with the Commission about this," she said. "But for now, I see no grounds to confiscate your devices." She turned to leave, then paused at the doorway and looked back at the humans with an expression that her species rarely showed to other beings. "You are a very strange people," she said. "When faced with an obstacle, you do not stop or go around, you simply create something new." Dr. Chun took the comment as a compliment, even if it had not been intended as one. Word of the thermal cocoons spread through the expedition camp faster than gossip at a diplomatic reception, and by the next evening, representatives from every species on the team had found reasons to visit the human sleeping quarters and observe the strange devices in action. The youngest Qualoth researcher, a curious individual named Chitkal, who had never quite fit in with his more conventional peers, was the first non-human to approach Dr. Chun directly. "Dr. Chun," he clicked, his compound eyes bright with interest. "I have been observing your thermal cocoons, and I am very impressed by their design." "Thank you, Chitkal," Dr. Chun replied warmly. "Would you like to take a closer look?" The young Queloth practically vibrated with excitement as Dr. Chun showed him the construction of the cocoon, explaining how the fern leaves created pockets of trapped air that provided insulation and how the fabric shell kept everything contained and in place. "This is remarkable," Chitkal said, his mandibles clicking rapidly. "My species does not need such warmth, of course, but the principle is fascinating from a scientific perspective." That was how it started, with one curious Queloth asking questions and listening to answers, but it did not end there. A Felixian trader named Markat approached the humans the next day, her feline features arranged in what the translator called cautious interest. "I have elderly parents on a cold climate colony," she said, "and they struggle during the winter months despite their fur. So I wonder if your design might be adapted for Felixian physiology." Dr. Chun and her team spent an evening working with Markabia to modify the cocoon design, adjusting the size and shape to accommodate the Felixian body type and testing different configurations of the fern leaf filling. The result was not perfect, but Market declared it a significant improvement over anything her parents currently had access to. Then came the Morven engineer, a floating being named Uval, who was fascinated by the thermal properties of the fern leaves and wanted to study them for potential applications in spacecraft insulation. Then a pair of Felixian scientists, who saw commercial potential in mass-producing the cocoons for cold climate colonies throughout coalition space. Then a Qualoth elder who admitted that while his species did not need the warmth, the cozy enclosed feeling of the cocoon reminded him of his larval days in a way that was deeply comforting. Within 2 weeks of their discovery, the humans found themselves running an informal workshop every evening, teaching anyone who was interested how to construct their own thermal cocoons and helping them adapt the design for their particular needs. Overseer Crickstall watched this development with a mixture of amazement and resignation. Her reports to the Commission, growing longer and more detailed as she documented the unexpected consequences of what had started as a simple survival measure. "The humans have done something unprecedented," she wrote in her official log. "They have turned a restriction into an opportunity. And in doing so, they have brought the species of this expedition closer together than any official team-building exercise ever could." She paused, her mandibles clicking thoughtfully, then added one more line. "I am beginning to understand why the galaxy finds them so unsettling." By the time the expedition was scheduled to return home, 37 non-humans were sleeping in modified thermal cocoons every night. And the design had been transmitted to 12 different star systems for testing and evaluation. The humans just smiled and helped anyone who asked, never demanding credit or compensation, simply doing what their species had always done best. They adapted, they shared, and they made something new. Commander Varalthak sat alone in his private office at the heart of the Galactic Regulatory Commission, his crystalline form pulsing with colors that his species used to express emotions that most other beings could never understand. On the display screen before him was the final report from the Kepler 447 expedition, and he had read it 17 times trying to convince himself that the words would somehow change if he looked at them long enough. They did not change. The report detailed everything that had happened, from the humans nearly freezing in the first nights to their invention of the thermal cocoons to the subsequent adoption of the technology by dozens of other species on the expedition. Attached to the report were testimonials from Felixian colonists who were now using adapted cocoons to survive harsh winters, from Qualoth elders who had rediscovered the comfort of enclosed sleeping, and from Morven engineers who were incorporating the thermal principles into new spacecraft designs. There was also a formal petition signed by representatives from 34 species, requesting that the thermal cocoon be recognized as an official galactic standard piece of equipment. Varalthak's S-light pulsed a deep purple. The color his people used to express what other species might call frustration mixed with unwilling admiration. How do they keep doing this? He muttered to himself, though of course there was no one there to answer. He pulled up the file he'd been adding to for years, the one titled Human Incident Reports, that documented every time the strange soft-skinned species had done something unexpected and inexplicable. There was the time they had been forbidden from bringing their companion animals on a diplomatic mission, so they had trained the local wildlife to perform the same emotional support functions instead. There was the time they had been denied access to certain restricted databases, so they had simply recreated the information from scratch through independent research and observation. There was the time they had been told they could not build a settlement on a particular moon, so they had built it inside the moon instead and claimed it did not count as a surface structure. And now there was this, a simple ban on sleeping bags that had somehow resulted in a galaxy-wide innovation in thermal technology. Varalthak added the new entry to his file, his crystalline fingers moving slowly across the interface as he tried to capture the full absurdity of the situation. Incident 447. manned sleeping bags to prevent diplomatic disasters. Humans invented thermal cocoons instead, design now requested as official galactic standard. He paused, his light shifting through several colors as he considered what else to add. Note: banning human survival equipment does not prevent human survival. It merely forces innovation. Recommend against future restrictive measures, unless prepared for humans to invent something better. Or possibly worse, it remains unclear which outcome is more concerning. The door to his office chimed, and Viral Thac's light shifted to a neutral white as he gave permission to enter. Dr. Amara Chun walked in with the same calm dignity she had shown at the original mandate hearing, and she was carrying a package wrapped in simple brown paper. "Commander Viral Thax," she said with a polite nod. "I wanted to deliver this personally before I returned to Earth." She placed the package on his desk and stepped back, waiting for him to open it. Viral Thac's crystalline fingers carefully unwrapped the paper to reveal a small thermal cocoon. Sized perfectly for a being of his dimensions and made from fine fabric in the deep blue color that his species found most pleasing. "The expedition team wanted you to have this," Dr. Chun explained, "as a thank you for creating the conditions that led to its invention." Viral Thax stared at the cocoon for a long moment, his light pulsing through colors that his species rarely showed to outsiders. "You are thanking me," he said slowly, "for banning your equipment and nearly causing your team to freeze." "We are thanking you for challenging us," Dr. Chun corrected gently, "because without that challenge, we never would have created something new." She smiled, and there was no malice or resentment in her expression, only the genuine warmth that humans seem to generate as naturally as body heat. "Humans have a saying, Commander," she continued. "That necessity is the mother of invention, and you gave us the necessity. So in a way, the thermal cocoon is as much your creation as it is ours." Viral Thax did not know how to respond to that, so he simply picked up the small cocoon and felt its weight in his hands. It was soft and warm, even without anyone inside it, and he could feel the careful craftsmanship that had gone into its construction. "I will add this to my collection of human artifacts," he said finally. "Though I must admit, I do not understand why you continue to confuse me with your generosity." Da Chun laughed, a warm sound that filled the sterile office with something approaching life. "Perhaps someday you will understand, Commander," she said, "and when you do, you will be welcome to visit Earth and see where all this strangeness comes from." She gave him one last polite nod and then turned to leave, her footsteps echoing softly on the crystalline floor. Viral Thax watched her go, and when the door closed behind her, he allowed his light to shift through the full spectrum of colors that his species used to express wonder. On his display screen, the petition for galactic standard status was still waiting for his approval, and he reached out with one crystalline finger to press the button that would make it official. "Standard approved," the system announced. "Thermal cocoon now recognized as official equipment for all coalition expeditions." Viral Thax leaned back in his chair and looked at the small cocoon that Dr. Chun had given him, and he felt something that his people rarely experienced. It was a feeling that humans had a name for, though the translation never quite captured its full meaning. Hope? Hope that perhaps these strange, soft-skinned beings with their constant adaptations and innovations might actually make the galaxy a better place, even if they did it in ways that no one else could ever predict. He added one final note to his incident report, a recommendation that he knew his successors would probably ignore, but that he felt compelled to make anyway. Final observation: the humans appear to view restrictions not as obstacles, but as opportunities. And this quality may be their most dangerous trait, but also their most valuable. Further study recommended with caution. Then he closed the file and turned to face the window that looked out over the great city that served as the Coalition's capital. Somewhere out there, humans were probably already working on their next impossible invention, turning some new ban or restriction into an opportunity for innovation. And Viral Thax found that he was almost looking forward to seeing what they would come up with next. Almost. After all, he thought as his light pulsed with something approaching amusement, someone had to write the incident reports.